Jack Marston's story and what happened to him after the events of Red Dead Redemption is one of the most discussed about topics in the Red Dead community. Many people want him to be the next protagonist in a Red Dead game set after the story of Red Dead Redemption. Today, I'm going to be going over the most popular fan theories about Jack's life after Red Dead Redemption and what I think actually happened to him. But the first thing I have to do is recap the events that got Jack to the point where he is in the end of the game. So at the end of the game, of course, John Marston is shot in front of him, and John sacrifices his life to get Jack and Abigail out of there and taking on the Bureau of Investigation agents himself, where he goes out there to confront Ross, and then Ross just shoots him because John really is the only one that had any problem with the Bureau of Investigation. Like, Jack and Abigail didn't really do anything. John was the one who actually really lived the outlaw life. And then in the epilogue mission, which is called Remember My Family, Abigail Marston also passes away, and Jack goes to then seek his revenge on Edgar Ross. He first tracks down Edgar Ross by going to Blackwater and meeting a Bureau of Investigation agent who tells Jack that Ross has already retired from the Bureau of Investigation and isn't working there anymore, and says that Ross is likely at his house at Lake Don Julio, which is where he's retired to. Jack then goes to Lake Don Julio, where he meets Ross's wife, and Ross's wife tells Jack that Edgar Ross actually isn't there, and that while Jack is delivering a package to him, he can then go meet Ross, where he's gone duck hunting out with his brother in Mexico. Jack then travels all the way down to Mexico, where he meets a man that looks like he's going duck hunting, and he asks him, "Are you Edgar Ross?" The man just says, "That's my brother, but I actually know where Edgar is. He's down on the riverbank, but if you're going to be delivering a package to him and talking to him, don't get on his bad side because he does have a pretty bad temper and he will lash out at people pretty constantly." Jack then eventually finds Edgar Ross and tells Edgar exactly who he is, that he's John Marston's son, and that he came here to seek revenge on Edgar Ross because he killed his father, and he also basically killed his mother indirectly. But Ross kind of belittles him and says, "I was just doing my job. Your father, John Marston, was a really bad man. He killed all these different people, and me as a government agent, I needed to get rid of all these outlaws who have been doing bad things to society and have been hurting society by spreading fear and just hurting people in general by taking money from them and just, spreading fear into society," which, again, as a government agent, I have to go out and root out any cause. Jack then says, "Do you have any remorse for my father and killing my entire family?" And Ross just continues to belittle him, and then Ross tells Jack to go away, and if he doesn't go away, then he'll have to shoot him just like he did his father. And Jack doesn't go away, which triggers a duel, which Jack then eventually wins, which ends the game of Red Dead Redemption. But essentially, the thematic conclusion of the game is that this cycle of violence will never end because people will always be seeking revenge on the people who have wronged them, and Jack has done the exact same thing his father done and has become an outlaw himself. Outcome 1. Jack becomes an outlaw just like John and Arthur had already been. I feel like this is probably the least likely outcome in this entire thing because I feel like it's pretty unlikely that Jack could become an outlaw, especially as the Wild West was really dying down. I know there are some people that would say maybe he becomes an outlaw in Mexico because there is the Mexican Civil War that still happens around this time, but I feel like that doesn't really make sense in terms of what he would do, especially as he knows his father kind of dealt with another Mexican Civil War in its own right around this time. So it really wouldn't make a lot of sense for Jack to become an outlaw himself. He's already seen the damage it's done to his family, and his mom has really put him up on this thing of like, oh, never become an outlaw, never do all these things, become a writer, do these things, and make yourself better than your father is, because your father really isn't a good guy. He isn't a guy to look out for and think that he's a good person because he's done bad things all his life. And while he's a good man now, he's done so many bad things in the past that those bad things have come back to haunt him. And I feel like that's clearly shown by the fact that Ross does eventually shoot him at the end of the game. So I do feel like it's very unlikely that Jack could become an outlaw, but you also understand that he did just kill a man in Mexico. So it wouldn't be that hard to get into the outlaw lifestyle from this point. But I do just think this would be extremely unlikely because the outlaw lifestyle really has been going down and down and down. And even by the time of John's life, the outlaw lifestyle really is a thing of the past. And by the time that Jack Jack gets there, it really is the industrial age and things are being made by machines and everything has been taken over by industry instead of being an outlaw. You really can't be free anymore by the time it gets to Jack. And that's when the world wars are happening. That's when all these bigger things are happening on a global scale. So I still feel like it's pretty unlikely that Jack could even become an outlaw, because it just seems very unlikely that he could support himself as an outlaw, because there's probably not that many things you can do. Maybe again, going to Mexico, he could become an outlaw, but there's probably not that many places in the United States that you could do it. I guess technically there is that movie with Brad Pitt called The Legend of the Fall where he moves to Montana, and I feel like Jack could move to Montana and maybe still be like an outlaw or a cow rustler, or maybe even start his own farm there. But I feel like it's pretty unlikely that he just becomes a normal person, because these things are just going so far out the window in being a farmer or just a regular dude on a ranch, and following in his father's footsteps just seems extremely unlikely to me, and doesn't seem like something that Jack would do, just because he's seen the bad things that it's already done to his family and already done to all the people around him. So he probably wouldn't want to keep on perpetuating these bad things, even though he already kind of did that by killing Ross, but at least that was like a vengeance seeking out thing by him. Outcome 2, Jack is gunned down by the Bureau of Intelligence after he's found out to be the one who murdered Ross. I think this one is actually pretty plausible, because Jack really does a terrible job of like kind of trying to clear everything up. He talks to Ross's wife, he talks to Ross's brother, he talks to the guy at the Bureau of Intelligence. It's like all three of these people could be like, wait, there's a common person who talked to all three of us, and then Edgar Ross died. And the guy who was delivering a package to Edgar Ross talked to me right before Edgar Ross was killed. And even though Jack did kill Ross in Mexico, where the United States government probably doesn't have like jurisdiction over covering a murder there, he did murder a US citizen in a different country, and it seems like the Bureau of Intelligence isn't really someone to do something that's outside of the law's jurisdiction, as they literally kill John Marston for basically doing nothing. I mean, of course he did murder a lot of people, but he didn't really do anything bad that they could have convicted him on, because he didn't really leave that much of an evidence trail that they could have found behind him. And I don't think that they can just bring a whole raid to a guy's house just because they can do it on their watch. They clearly are doing things outside of the law and without a warrant. And you can't just shoot someone just for killing a bunch of other people. You probably have to take them to jail first. But clearly during this time, it seems like they can really operate outside of the law. So I wouldn't really put it past the Bureau of Intelligence to go and find Jack and kill him themselves, but it does seem like Jack isn't stupid enough to just become exactly what John did. He probably would change his name a little bit or try and do something outside of the law, because of course the Bureau of Intelligence is probably going to be looking for him. Even though he didn't give his name to anyone, they could probably figure it out based on how other people talk about him and who Ross has actually wronged himself. There are a lot of things that could have the Bureau of Intelligence coming after him. I feel like it still would be pretty unlikely that he would get killed by the Bureau of Intelligence, just because it would be kind of hard to place it together, and because he did commit the crime in Mexico itself, that is going to be a lot harder for them to be like, oh, we have a case against this guy, because Mexico's in a civil war at this time, and there's a lot of things going on at this time that would probably make them not chase after a case like this, where Ross has a lot of other enemies. Even though they know the guy based on his description, it probably would be really hard to find Jack, especially if he did something to cover his tracks and maybe just changed his name and moved into a different area, or even like shaved off the mustache and changed his appearance just a little bit. It'd be pretty easy to escape from the Bureau of Intelligence. So I do think this wouldn't be all that plausible. Outcome 3. Jack moves to Mexico and becomes a similar person to Landon Ricketts, and kind of just helps the people around there and tries to ingratiate himself into their community. I feel like this is something that Jack could definitely do, just because John probably told Jack about Landon Ricketts when he came back, because this is someone that Jack has kind of been idolizing his whole life after reading all these dime novels, and people always thought that Landon Ricketts was dead. And the fact that John actually got to meet him and talk with him and see how Landon really loved Mexico as a place to live and wanted to live there with the rest of his life, and that's where he eventually did die. It probably means that Jack does hold something out for Mexico, and since he grew up on Landon Ricketts and saw that Landon Ricketts did eventually die in Mexico, I could definitely see Jack moving to Mexico. It also is a place where you're probably not going to get extradited to the United States, and I feel like the Bureau of Intelligence probably wouldn't have someone go out there and make a raid on Mexican soil, because that would probably be something that could start a war. And I'm sure the United States doesn't want to start a war with Mexico. They'd rather help Mexico and keep a nice relationship between the two of them. And that's clearly why the Bureau of Intelligence never went to Mexico to take out Bill Williamson or Javier Escuela. They had someone go that had connections to both those people and had John take them out, instead of the Bureau of Intelligence actually going to Mexico and having a hand in that themselves. So it probably is pretty likely that he could get away with all these things if he just moved to Mexico and became a regular person there, kind of like what Landon Ricketts did, because it probably would be pretty easy to move there and start a new life there, maybe take a Mexican wife and really just ingratiate himself into the community there. So this is definitely something that I could see Jack doing, especially because John had a nice relationship with Landon Ricketts, and Jack had already grown up on the Landon Ricketts mythology, because Landon Ricketts had been someone that he had been listening to for a long time and hearing about for a long time due to him reading a lot of dime novels during his time of Red Dead Redemption 2, where he's kind of like learning about all these gunslingers and wants to be a gunslinger himself. So he'd probably heard of Landon Ricketts and the fact that his dad actually got to go and talk to Landon Ricketts and become an honest gunslinger there. And Landon Ricketts had probably shot so many different people in the United States and had so many things chasing after him that going to Mexico was a good place to get away from all that and stop being someone and stop living the outlaw lifestyle. You can just blend in and be a person in the town that just is a benefit to society and kind of get away from all the ills of the United States, and instead go to somewhere where you can kind of live a more outlaw lifestyle while at the same time living a much more simple life than in America, where like industry is really kicking into full gear here. But Mexico maybe wouldn't be the best place for him to live, just because Mexico at this time really did have a bad civil war. I mean, John was literally fighting in the Civil War, but there's also a civil war just a couple years later down the line in real life during World War I, and that's why the United States didn't join for a while in World War I. And while Abraham Reyes might know his father and might have some connections there, I don't think it would make a lot of sense for Jack to go into a place that's in a current civil war and is still fighting over who's trying to rule the entire territory. Even if he is connected to Abraham Reyes, he can only be protected by Abraham Reyes for as long as Abraham Reyes is in power. And if Abraham Reyes quickly loses power, Jack could clearly be in a bad spot. So I don't really think Mexico makes the most sense, just because it does have a lot of turmoil there, and being in America at this time would probably be a lot better because they're not in World War I and they don't have anything bad going on. They're kind of the ones that are benefiting from World War I happening in Europe, because they're the only place that can actually provide things to Europe and make money off Europe. So overall, I feel like Jack probably wouldn't go down to Mexico, just because there's so many better opportunities for Jack in the United States, especially as it wouldn't be that hard to escape from the Bureau of Intelligence, just because all he had to do is maybe like change his name and change his appearance, or even he could keep the name and just change his appearance, because all they know him by is the appearance. And especially if he moved to a state that's super far away from where they're going in the actual game in New Austin or West Elizabeth, if he just moved to like California or something, I feel like it wouldn't be that hard to escape the Bureau of Intelligence. So I feel like it's pretty unlikely that Jack stayed in Mexico. Jack Marston becomes a mafia member or a gangster during the Prohibition period. I feel like this has got to be one of the stupidest outcomes in this entire thing. I know a lot of people on Reddit have thought about this, but this really just seems like someone's kind of pushing their own fantasy of playing a Rockstar Mafia game onto Jack's actual life. Like, clearly Jack is probably pretty unlikely to join a mafia outfit, especially during Prohibition at this time. Like, clearly he could have done this, but I feel like this is very similar to becoming an outlaw, and as he's already seen how violence has really ruined his family's life, I feel like this would be one of the last things that Jack would do. And this is mainly just a thing for people that have an idea of the next Red Dead Redemption game being a different version of the outlaw and Western game, and kind of like pushing the ideas stars of GTA onto Rockstar itself. I feel like there's no reason for Red Dead Redemption to even have a game set outside the Western period. I feel like anything after the time of 1914, which is when Red Dead Redemption 1's epilogue ends, doesn't really make a lot of sense. I feel like everything needs to happen even earlier than that, and I think if a Red Dead Redemption 3 comes out, Jack being the main character would not really make a lot of sense because his story kind of already is concluded at the end of Red Dead Redemption 1, and we can kind of just speculate on it in videos like these. I also think just in general, this would just be super outlandish. Normally the people in the mafia were either Italians or people that had connections to the mafia. And I feel like Jack probably wouldn't have any connections to the mafia. And at this time, he'd probably be like 31. So it wouldn't really be that easy to get into the mafia himself. I just feel like overall, this is just such an unlikely outcome. And it's more people putting themselves into Jack's life being like, oh, I wish I could be a part of the mafia and play a Red Dead Redemption game that's part of the mafia. But also, I think another thing that's really weird to me is that people don't understand that Rockstar would never make a Mafia game because it doesn't make sense because 2K literally owns Hangar 13, who makes the Mafia games. Like, there's no reason for Rockstar to ever put out a huge budget Mafia game because one of their sister studios that's owned by the same parent company is also putting out Mafia games. And there's so many other things that they could explore before making a Mafia game, especially when the only other popular Mafia game on the market is made by the same company as them, and they wouldn't want to compete with that. Overall, the whole mafia idea just doesn't make sense at all. Him becoming a gangster during Prohibition doesn't make sense. Maybe he is a crime boss somewhere else, but him joining the mafia and becoming a gangster, it's just like meshing two things that don't really make sense at all together just because it would be a cool thing to play as a mafia boss. Outcome 5, World War I. Very similar to the Mafia one. I feel like this one doesn't make any sense at all when you think about it for just 1 second. I understand that Jack could be drafted to go to World War One, but it really just seems like something that someone's like, wow, it'd be so cool if I could play as World War One Jack Marston. Like, I feel like Jack would try to dodge the draft as much as possible because the government is really the reason why he's an orphan and doesn't have any family anymore. They're the ones who have been chasing after his family his entire life. And even when his dad became a much better person and tried to get away from the outlaw life, the government chased him down, took away his family, and put them in a really bad spot. Like, I don't know what Abigail and Jack's conditions were in the prison that they were sent to, but clearly they were put in a really bad spot and taken away from John for a reason, and clearly the government knows exactly what they were doing, and Agent Ross is the one who basically hurt his entire family. And why would Jack want to fight for the country who turned him into an orphan and took away his entire family from him? And also, it's not even like getting drafted was that common of a thing. Sure, it did happen to like 10 to 15% of all the people that signed up for the draft and were forced to sign up for the draft, but it wasn't like it was the most common thing and every single person got conscripted into the army. It was a thing that happened to definitely a lot of people, but it wasn't like every single man in that age period had to go to the war. And I feel like Jack, especially with someone that has a lot of valid grievances and not fighting for the US, probably wouldn't go even if he did get drafted. So I feel like overall, very similar to the Mafia idea, this is just some wishful thinking on the fans' part because they're like, oh my god, World War II happened right after the game ends. It'd be so cool if we could see a game, a Western game themed around World War I, which wouldn't even make sense in its own right. But I just think in general, World War I isn't really like the most pretty of wars. There's a reason why there's only one major shooter game based in World War I being Battlefield 1, and that doesn't really have any sequels to it. There really is just the one game around World War One because it was such a disgusting and disturbing war. It doesn't really make sense for like a game around it because so many bad things happened to the people in that war. It was the first war that kind of like standardized a lot of these things that became commonplace in wars after the fact. So just overall, I feel like it's not something that would be that fun to play, and it mainly is just people projecting onto Red Dead 3 is going to be Jack fighting in World War One, which doesn't make any sense either. either, because again, I think Jack's story is kind of concluded and meant to be left up to interpretation in Red Dead Redemption 1. And last but not least, we have outcome 6, which is Jack moves to LA and becomes a writer. This one I think is probably the most plausible. I feel like Jack does have a lot of things that he wants to share of his life, and I feel like he's always wanted to become a writer. You can see in game that it seems like he's really obsessed with books and really obsessed with writing and reading and telling stories. And I feel like the thing that Jack would want to do is tell stories about the life he grew up in and all these different things that he really has a first person account of, and hearing stories from his dad and talking about Landon Ricketts and all these different things that he could really give a cool point of view about are things that he would probably want to share as a writer. So I think Jack in general probably did become a writer because he does have so much like content that he can use and turn into these really interesting stories. And of course, the main reason why this is a super plausible thing is you can see in the GTA universe that there's a book in one of the houses that says Jack Marston, Red Dead. So of course, this is just an Easter egg from GTA, and I'm pretty sure the universes aren't that connected like that. While there are connections between the two universes, there's nothing that would say that they're in the same universe, and there's clearly a lot of conflicting things that would say they're definitely not in the same universe. But it does kind of make a lot of sense to me that Jack would go to Los Angeles and potentially become like a scriptwriter for movies, because like I feel like movies are the very next thing that would become big at this time period in terms of ways to tell stories, and westerns were really big during this time period as well. And who would be better at writing westerns than someone who really lived that life? And I think there's also a good connection to Wyatt Earp. Wyatt Earp is a famous gunslinger who eventually moved to LA and tried to get his own life story sold, and eventually he did become a very famous person because he got his life story told in a bunch of different movies, including the movie Tombstone, where he's a main character there. But just in general, I feel like it makes the most sense that Jack wanted to chase his dreams after killing Ross, because there's no reason to just become an outlaw and a rancher and all these things that his dad was. He never wanted to be his dad, and while he did go on the same revenge arc that his dad went on, I don't think he ever wanted to follow in his dad's footsteps. He always was way more of a quiet kid who wanted to do these things of being an outlaw in his head instead of in real life. He always wanted to read these things and pretend to be a part of that. Like he's talking about King Arthur, and he's talking about all these like super bookish things. He doesn't really seem like a guy that would be an outlaw to me or a rancher. He always seems like someone who deserved to be in a big city and doing kind of like more normal industry type jobs that you would because you live in the United States, and because the United States is so industrialized that there are jobs for artists and writers. And that's exactly what Jack probably would become if he did move in the Red Dead Redemption world. And that's why I think Jack's story is kind of concluded. There's no reason to have him be an outlaw because his story is already kind of done in Red Dead Redemption 1, and there's only things to speculate on. And it makes the most sense that Jack would instead leave this outlaw and Red Dead Redemption and Western life behind, and instead move to a city and have a family there and really just live and breathe the new American dream instead of the old American dream of all the freedom and all the new places you can go. Instead, breathe the American dream of you can start your own life becoming a creative and do creative stuff like art and making movies and writing books. And I just think that's exactly what Jack would do, because he's always been in love with reading and writing and doing the more bookish things instead of becoming an outlaw like a lot of people wanted him to be. So I think Jack in general probably would just become a writer, and at least this to me seems the most plausible out of all these different ideas. Maybe he just got a regular job instead of becoming a writer, but I just think it makes the most sense that Jack would move to a big city where he could just kind of blend in and not be seen as this huge person that's like a cool outlaw. He would kind of just want to be a normal person. I feel like moving to a big city would make the most sense for him, especially somewhere on the West Coast or the East Coast where he could really get away from the life that he was living before, and instead move into an area where he can kind of blend in and not have his crimes come to haunt him like they did his father, because his father was just out there ranching and clearly didn't try to do anything to cover himself up. If Jack moves to a big city, he can easily either take on a new name or just become a different person. And I think it would just be a lot easier for Jack to disappear disappear and hide in a big city instead of just disappearing in the wilderness, because the wilderness is kind of getting all turned into its own area, and moving to a big city would just be the thing you do during this time period. So I feel like that's the most likely thing that Jack did. He moved to a big city to get away from all these things, and he just got a normal job living his life like any other person during this time period would. But that's the entirety of what I think Jack Marston would do after Red Dead Redemption 1, and there are going to be some amazing videos popping up right now, so click on them.